In the depths of northeastern Siberia, there lies a forgotten village named Kolat-Syakhl, which in the native language means Dead Mountain. It was a place shunned by the local tribes for centuries, whispered to be cursed by the spirits of those who perished there in mysterious circumstances. The tale begins in the winter of 1959 when a group of 9 hikers, led by the experienced Igor Dyatlov, ventured into the heart of the Ural Mountains, seeking the thrill of an adventure in the harsh Siberian wilderness. Their journey was supposed to be challenging yet exhilarating, pushing the limits of their endurance and skill. However, what awaited them was beyond the comprehension of any living soul. The group was young, vibrant, and full of life, their spirits unbroken by the biting cold. They documented their trek with photographs and journal entries, filled with laughter and camaraderie. But as they approached the slopes of Kolat-Syakhl, the weather turned viciously against them, and their entries grew tense, the smiles in their photographs dimming with the light. One night, their camp was suddenly and violently disrupted. The tents were torn open from the inside, as evidenced by the cuts in the fabric found later. Footprints in the snow, barefoot and desperate, led away from the campsite to the tree line. The bodies of the hikers were discovered days later, scattered across the mountain slope, their deaths a macabre mystery that puzzled investigators. Some were found frozen, with expressions of terror etched into their faces, while others showed signs of a horrific struggle, with injuries that could not be easily explained by an avalanche or wildlife. One of the women had her tongue grotesquely removed, and others had fractures and internal injuries akin to a car crash, yet there was no external sign of trauma. The scene was as chilling as it was baffling, with Soviet authorities quickly sealing off the area and declaring the incident a result of an unknown compelling force. The story of Dyatlov Pass, as it came to be known, was buried under layers of Soviet secrecy, only resurfacing after the fall of the USSR. The intrigue surrounding the hikers' deaths led many to speculate wildly: aliens, military experiments, Yeti attacks, but none could definitively explain the sheer horror of what occurred on that bleak mountain. Decades later, a young documentary filmmaker named Alexei, obsessed with the Dyatlov Pass incident, decided to retrace the steps of the ill-fated expedition. With his small crew, he journeyed into the Ural Mountains, armed with cameras, recording equipment, and a burning need to uncover the truth hidden beneath decades of mystery and speculation. As they ascended the same slopes that Dyatlov and his team had climbed, strange occurrences began to plague Alexei's team. Equipment malfunctioned without reason, batteries drained within hours, and chilling whispers seemed to float through the wind, though no source could be identified. The crew felt an ever-growing sense of dread, an unseen gaze watching from the shadows of the twisted, snow-laden pines. One night, huddled around a crackling fire, Alexei reviewed the footage from the day's climb and froze in horror. The camera had captured more than just snow and trees. Faint images of figures, barely discernible, appeared sporadically in the background, their forms blurry and their movements unnaturally disjointed. As he leaned closer, straining his eyes against the grainy footage, a whisper echoed through the speakers, a simple, terrifying sentence that made his blood run cold: "Leave the mountain." Ignoring the warning, driven by a mix of fear and fascination, Alexei pushed his team onward, up towards the peak of Kolat-Syakhl. The weather worsened, a blizzard enveloping the mountain in a suffocating white fury that disoriented and frightened even the most experienced among them. That night, with the storm at its peak and the wind howling like the cries of the damned, Alexei's tent was suddenly bathed in an eerie glow. Grabbing his camera, he staggered outside, his vision blurred by the snow and wind. There, in the midst of the storm, stood a figure, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, its stare fixed upon him. As Alexei stared into the glowing eyes of the figure standing in the blizzard, his heart pounded against his chest with a ferocity that threatened to overwhelm him. The figure, seemingly untouched by the ferocious storm, stood silently, its outline blurry and indistinct through the swirling snow. Alexei raised his camera, his fingers numb and clumsy from the cold, and managed to press the record button. The lens whirred, struggling to focus on the spectral apparition before him. The figure moved slowly, almost floating towards Alexei, its movements eerily graceful in the violent storm. As it approached, Alexei could see that its features were both horrific and fascinating, a face pale and distorted, with deep, dark sockets where eyes should have been, yet within those hollows, a faint, unnatural light flickered. Its mouth was a gaping maw, twisted in what could only be described as a grotesque imitation of a smile. Paralyzed with fear, Alexei could only watch as the figure stopped mere feet away from him. The wind seemed to quieten, the snow falling more gently around them as if time itself was slowing down. The figure reached out a hand, and Alexei felt an irresistible pull to step forward, his body moving against his will. Just then, a shout pierced the eerie calm. One of Alexei's crew, Mikhail, emerged from his tent, flashlight in hand. The light sliced through the darkness, hitting the figure directly. In an instant, the apparition vanished, leaving Alexei to stumble forward into empty space, nearly falling face first into the snow. Mikhail rushed to Alexei, grabbing him by the shoulders. "Alexei, what are you doing out here?" "I heard you talking to someone," he said, his breath forming clouds of vapor in the freezing air. Alexei, still disoriented, tried to formulate a response but found himself at a loss for words. He glanced around, half expecting the figure to reappear, but there was only the endless dance of snowflakes in the beam of Mikhail's flashlight. "We need to leave, Mikhail. We need to get off this mountain," Alexei finally managed to say, his voice shaky. Mikhail looked at him, concern etched deeply into his weathered face. "Let's get you back into the tent. You're freezing, and you look like you've seen a ghost." Back in the relative warmth of the tent, Alexei replayed the footage from his camera, the crew huddled around the small screen. The video was shaky, the image often obscured by the snow, but as Alexei had feared, the figure was there, an indelible part of their harrowing experience. The crew watched in silent horror, the reality of their situation settling in like a heavy stone in each of their stomachs. Over the next few days, the atmosphere among the crew grew tense. Equipment failures increased, and several crew members reported nightmares featuring the spectral figure, each dream more disturbing than the last. Voices whispered through the camp at night, unintelligible but filled with an urgency that made it impossible to ignore. Determined to uncover the truth, Alexei decided they needed to visit the exact location where the Dyatlov group had made their final camp. Perhaps there, at that cursed site, they would find the answers they sought. The journey to the site was fraught with peril. The weather continued to deteriorate, and strange phenomena plagued their every step. Compasses spun inexplicably, and radios crackled with static, occasionally breaking into brief, frantic bursts of voices speaking in Russian, though the words were too distorted to make out clearly. Upon arriving at the site, the crew set up a makeshift camp, the mood somber and apprehensive. As night fell, the wind picked up, howling through the valley with mournful wails that sounded almost human. Alexei, unable to sleep, kept vigil outside his tent. The moon was full, casting a pale, eerie light over the snow-covered landscape. It was then he saw the figures, dozens of them, emerging from the shadows at the edge of the forest. They moved towards the camp, their forms vague and shifting, whispering amongst themselves in a chorus that was both beautiful and terrifying. Grabbing his camera, Alexei began to film, his hands steady despite the pounding of his heart. As he recorded, one of the figures broke away from the group, approaching him with an outstretched hand, its face a blurred semblance of human features. "Help us," it whispered, its voice a chilling blend of longing and despair. The air around Alexei grew colder, and the figure's touch was like ice, burning his skin where it made contact. The whispers grew louder, a symphony of voices pleading for release, for salvation from their eternal torment. Alexei knew then that he was standing on sacred ground, a place of unspeakable tragedy and boundless sorrow. He also knew that the story of Dyatlov Pass was not just a tale of human error or natural disaster, but a nexus of supernatural forces beyond the grasp of the living. The air vibrated with the energy of unresolved spirits, and the ground beneath him seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Alexei continued to film, his camera the only barrier between him and the complete surrender to the overwhelming forces surrounding him. The figure that had approached him stood silent now, its hand still extended in a gesture that spoke of both invitation and warning. The whispers converged into a coherent voice, the spirit's tone mournful yet urgent. "We are bound to this place, trapped by the sins of those long gone and the curses they invoked," it explained, its form becoming clearer in the moonlight. It appeared almost human, a young woman, her eyes deep pools of sorrow. "Free us," she pleaded, her voice breaking with the weight of centuries. Alexei, moved by the spirit's plea, responded, "How can I free you? What must be done?" His voice was steady, though his heart raced with fear and compassion. The spirit's eyes flickered with a spark of hope, a stark contrast to the cold desolation around them. "There is a ritual, old as the mountain itself. It can break the chains that hold us here, but it comes with great risk. The darkness that binds us also protects a deeper evil, one that must not be unleashed." Alexei nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He was no longer just a filmmaker, he was a mediator between the living and the dead, potentially a liberator of tormented souls. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but he knew he had to help. "Tell me what I need to do," Alexei said, his resolve hardening. The spirit began to recite the ritual, a series of steps that involved ancient symbols to be drawn in the snow, offerings to be made, and incantations to be spoken at the stroke of midnight. The crew, awoken by the unfolding events, gathered around, their faces etched with fear and fascination. Together, they prepared to perform the ritual, each step carefully executed under the guidance of the spirit. As midnight approached, the mountain seemed to hold its breath, the wind dying down to a sinister calm. Alexei and his crew, positioned in a circle around the symbols they had drawn, began the incantations. The air grew thick, charged with an electric tension that made their skin crawl. Suddenly, the ground trembled, a low rumble that grew into a roar as the mountain itself seemed to react to the ritual. From the forest, shadows lengthened and twisted, forming into grotesque shapes that darted around the edges of their circle. The temperature dropped, frost forming on their clothing and equipment, as if the very heat of their bodies was being siphoned away. The spirit's voice rose over the chaos, clear and commanding, urging them to continue. Alexei, his voice nearly lost in the wind, repeated the final incantation, his breath visible in the frigid air. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The wind ceased, the shadows dissipated, and the stars above shone brightly, their light pure and clear. The air felt lighter, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from the land. The spirit, now visibly more peaceful, smiled at Alexei and his crew. "You have done it," she said, her voice a gentle whisper. "We are free. But remember, the darkness you have kept at bay is not destroyed. Guard this place, keep the ritual safe, for others may seek to unleash what you have worked so hard to contain." With those final words, the spirit and her companions faded into the night, leaving Alexei and his team alone on the mountain, surrounded by the eerie calm of a newly liberated land. They packed up their equipment, a sense of accomplishment mixed with an unshakable foreboding. As they descended the mountain, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon, Alexei reflected on the night's events. They had touched something ancient and powerful, a part of history that was both tragic and terrifying. He knew their footage would be groundbreaking, revolutionizing the understanding of paranormal phenomena. However, he also recognized the burden they now carried, the responsibility to protect the knowledge of the ritual and the dangers it held at bay. Back in civilization, as they reviewed the footage and prepared it for the documentary, Alexei felt a chilling sensation that they were being watched. The darkness was still out there, lurking, waiting for a chance to rise again. And as he lay down to sleep each night, the whispers of the mountain seemed to echo in his dreams, a haunting reminder of the truth he now knew. The documentary had barely scratched the surface of the mysteries entwined with Kholat-Syakhl. After their return, Alexei and his crew spent days poring over the footage, trying to make sense of the inexplicable events they had captured. Each frame revealed new layers of the chilling truth they had experienced. Shadows that moved with intention, sounds that defied logical explanation, and glimpses of figures that seemed caught between worlds. The more they watched, the more they felt the pull of the mountain, a siren call that beckoned them back to its snow-covered slopes. Alexei's sleep became restless, plagued by nightmares more vivid than any he had before. In these dreams, he stood alone on the mountain under a blood-red moon, surrounded by whispering shadows that crept ever closer. He would wake up sweating, the echo of those whispers lingering in his ears, a stark reminder that what they had encountered was far from over. Compelled by a mixture of dread and obligation, Alexei began to research more deeply into the ancient rituals associated with the region. His days were consumed with visits to obscure libraries and meetings with experts in Siberian folklore. He learned of their Otorten, a word from the local Mansi language meaning "don't go there," which referred to Kholat-Syakhl. This revelation only deepened the mystery and Alexei's resolve to understand it. Meanwhile, strange occurrences began to manifest around Alexei and his crew. Lights flickered without cause, equipment failed repeatedly despite being newly purchased, and shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of their vision. Each crew member felt a growing sense of unease, as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. As the documentary neared completion, an ominous atmosphere settled over the editing room. The footage seemed to change subtly each time it was viewed, revealing new horrors that went unnoticed before. Faces appeared in the background of shots, their expressions twisted in silent screams, and disembodied voices whispered over audio tracks. One evening, as they reviewed a particularly disturbing piece of footage, the power in the studio went out, plunging them into darkness. The emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim, unsettling glow. Alexei and his team felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, despite all windows being closed and the doors locked. A low hum filled the air, growing in intensity until it was almost deafening. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped and the power returned. The team sat in stunned silence, trying to rationalize what had happened, but the truth was clear. Whatever they had stirred on that mountain was not content to remain in the past. It was reaching out, crossing the boundaries they had thought impregnable. Determined to protect his team and uncover the truth, Alexei decided to confront the source of their torment. He proposed a second expedition to Kholat Syakhl, this time with more preparation and safeguards in place. His team, driven by a mix of fear and the need for closure, agreed to join him. They set out in the dead of winter, the mountain as foreboding as ever, its peaks shrouded in perpetual fog. The air was thick with the sense of impending doom, each step forward a defiance of the unseen forces that had marked them. Upon reaching the site of their previous encounter, they set up camp with a sense of urgency. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it voices that seemed almost human. That night, as they huddled around the campfire, the flames flickered erratically, casting ghostly shadows on the snow. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, breaths turning to mist in the icy air, and a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the woman they had seen before, her face sorrowful, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She spoke in a voice that resonated with the wind, her words cutting through the cold. "You cannot bind what you do not understand. The seal you rejoice in is weakening, and the darkness grows hungry," she warned, her gaze piercing each of them. The crew, armed with cameras and recording devices, captured every moment, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were standing on the precipice of something ancient and terrifying, a force that had existed long before them and would continue long after they were gone. As the woman vanished, leaving them in chilling silence, Alexei and his team knew that their journey was far from over. They needed to delve deeper, to find the root of the curse that held Kholat Syakhl in its grip. What followed was a series of events that tested their sanity, their bravery, and their understanding of the natural and supernatural worlds. As the woman's spectral form dissipated into the icy air, the chilling silence that followed was soon broken by an intense, earth-shattering roar that echoed across the mountain pass. The ground beneath their feet trembled, sending a clear signal that the unleashed forces were far from dormant. The crew, their faces etched with fear and determination, gathered their recording equipment and prepared to face whatever was to come. The next days were filled with frenetic activity as Alexei and his team set about uncovering the roots of the ancient curse. Guided by the cryptic warnings of the spectral woman and the local legends they had researched, they delved deeper into the heart of Kholat Syakhl. Each step seemed to draw them closer to an unseen threshold, beyond which lay truths so profound and terrifying that reality itself seemed to walk around them. As they ventured further, the environment grew increasingly hostile. Bizarre, unexplainable phenomena occurred with alarming frequency. Compass needles spun inexplicably, shadows moved against the direction of light, and the temperature fluctuated wildly, plunging into biting cold before suddenly sweltering heat. The very fabric of nature seemed to rebel against their presence. One night, as a fierce blizzard battered their camp, the team awoke to find the silhouette of a massive, hulking figure looming just beyond the reach of their lights. It moved with a ponderous, deliberate grace, its eyes glowing with a baleful light. The figure watched them for a long stretch of heartbeats, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the swirling snow. The encounter left the crew shaken but more resolved than ever to find answers. In the days that followed, Alexei led his team to a previously unexplored part of the mountain, where ancient stones were arranged in a peculiar formation that was neither natural nor entirely human in craftsmanship. At the center of this formation, they found an altar-like stone, covered in indecipherable runes that pulsed with a faint, eerie glow under the light of the moon. Convinced that this was the key to understanding the curse, Alexei set up his equipment to document their findings. As he began to recite some of the runes aloud, trying to phonetically sound out the ancient language, the air around them charged with an electric tension. The runes on the altar began to glow brighter, casting a sinister light that seemed to seep into the very ground. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently, and a deep fissure cracked open before the altar, releasing a howling wind that carried voices, thousands of them, crying out in agony and despair. The air filled with the oppressive weight of ancient grudges and unresolved torments, pressing down upon the crew with unbearable intensity. In the midst of this chaos, Alexei continued to chant, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each rune pronounced. As he spoke the final syllable, a blinding light erupted from the fissure, enveloping everything in its brilliant, terrifying luminance. When the light finally receded, the crew found themselves standing in a transformed landscape. The storm had cleared, and the mountain was silent as if holding its breath. The fissure had sealed itself, and the altar's runes no longer glowed with their ominous light. The oppressive atmosphere that had weighed down on them had lifted, leaving a calm that was both eerie and welcome. The spectral woman appeared once more, her expression now serene. "You have done what many believed impossible," she spoke softly, her voice echoing the newfound peace of the mountain. "The curse is broken, but remember, the darkness is not destroyed, only kept at bay. Vigilance must be maintained, knowledge preserved and passed on." With these parting words, she faded away, leaving Alexei and his crew alone on the mountain, surrounded by the quiet majesty of nature. They packed up their equipment, a sense of accomplishment mingled with the heavy responsibility they now carried. They had uncovered a story that would change them forever, a chilling tale of curses and spectral guardians, ancient rites, and the unyielding power of the human spirit to seek the truth, no matter how dark or deep it lay hidden. As they made their way down the mountain, the first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of gold and crimson, signaling the end of their harrowing journey and the beginning of another, keeping the darkness at bay and ensuring that the horrors of Kholat Syakhl remained a cautionary tale, never again a lethal reality. As Alexei and his crew descended the now peaceful slopes of Kholat Syakhl, the dawn light casting long shadows behind them, a profound sense of change permeated the air. The mountain, once a place of haunting fears and inexplicable phenomena, seemed to acknowledge their triumph over the ancient curse. Yet, the relief of their success was tempered by the knowledge of the fragile peace they had brokered with the supernatural forces they barely understood. Upon their return to civilization, the crew found themselves changed in ways that went beyond the physical strains of their harrowing experience. They were quieter, more reflective, carrying with them the weight of the knowledge that the darkness they had kept at bay was only ever a whisper away from awakening. Their footage, once merely a project meant to unveil the truth behind a decades-old mystery, now felt like a testament to the thin veil that separates the known from the unknown, the seen from the unseen. The documentary, titled Whispers of Kholat Syakhl, was released to critical acclaim. Audiences around the world were captivated by the eerie beauty of the Ural Mountains, the visceral fear of the crew's encounters, and the ancient rituals that had been captured on film. However, for Alexei, the film was more than a career milestone. It was a reminder of the oath he had taken on the mountain to maintain vigilance and preserve the knowledge of the dark forces he had encountered. The film's release did more than just tell a story. It served as a beacon, drawing others who had experienced similar phenomena to share their stories. Alexei found himself at the center of a network of people who had been touched by the supernatural. Together, they formed a collective dedicated to exploring and understanding the boundaries of the human experience and the mysteries that lay beyond. Years passed, and the memories of Kholat Syakhl began to fade into the background of Alexei's life. Yet, the mountain was never completely out of his thoughts. He often found himself staring out the window at night, his mind wandering back to the icy winds and the spectral figures of the past. One night, on the anniversary of their ritual on the mountain, Alexei woke to a chill in the air that felt hauntingly familiar. He walked to his window, peering out into the darkness, half expecting to see the shadowy outline of Kolat-Syakhl against the night sky. Instead, he saw nothing but the quiet streets of his city. But then, a whisper drifted through the air, so faint he thought he might have imagined it. "Remember," it said, a single word laden with a warning and a plea. Alexei's heart skipped a beat. He knew then that his connection to Kolat-Syakhl was far from over. The peace they had achieved was but a pause, a momentary respite in an ongoing struggle between light and dark. He understood that he was a guardian, bound to the mountain not just by fate but by choice. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by the many tokens and relics he had collected over the years, Alexei began to write. His book, a detailed account of their expedition, their findings, and the lessons they had learned, was his legacy. It was a guide for those who might one day face the same darkness, and a reminder that courage, respect, and understanding were humanity's greatest tools against the shadows. When the book was published, it was met with a mixture of awe and skepticism, but Alexei was undeterred. He knew the truth of his experiences, and he continued to speak at conferences and seminars, sharing his story and preparing others for the responsibilities they might one day hold. The most chilling true horror stories you have never heard became more than a tale of survival against supernatural forces. It was a call to vigilance, a testament to the indomitable human spirit, and a cautionary tale of the thin lines that separate our world from the ones that lie in wait, shrouded in the depths of night and mystery.